Bullied girl, afraid to go back to school. Then Dwayne Johnson shows up at her door. 12-year-old Jane Harper stood in front of the bathroom mirror, fingers brushing the edge of her eye patch. It wasn't just a patch. It was a silent reminder of everything that had changed. Her reflection stared back at her, vulnerable and hesitant. She hated the whispers, the sideways glances, the way kids snickered when they thought she couldn't hear. But what hurt the most was the weight of her own thoughts. The doubt, the shame, the fear that maybe this was all she would ever be. "Jane, time for school," her mother called from downstairs. Jane's chest tightened. She gave her reflection one last look before grabbing her backpack. As she stepped out of her room, the scent of scrambled eggs filled the air. Her dad, Louis, sat at the table with a cup of coffee, his tired smile waiting for her. "Morning, champ," he said, his voice warm despite the fatigue in his eyes. "Big day today?" Jane shrugged, her gaze fixed on her shoes. "It's just another day." Rebecca, her mother, appeared with a plate in hand, setting it in front of Jane. "You'll do great. Remember, you don't have to prove anything to anyone. Just be yourself." "But that's the problem, Mom," Jane whispered. "Being myself isn't enough." The words hung in the air like a dark cloud. Rebecca opened her mouth to respond, but stopped. Sometimes there were no words that could ease the ache in her daughter's voice. The drive to school was quiet. Jane sat in the back seat, staring out the window as neighborhoods rolled past, her hand absently grazing the edge of the eye patch. Louis glanced at her. In the rearview mirror, his heart heavy. "Hey," he said gently, breaking the silence. "Remember what we always say. Brave girls change the world." Jane offered a small, fleeting smile, but said nothing. As they pulled up to Westfield Middle School, the sight of kids streaming through the doors made her stomach churn. She clutched the straps of her backpack tightly. "I'll see you later," she mumbled, stepping out of the car. Rebecca watched as Jane disappeared into the building, her shoulders hunched. "She's carrying too much, Lou," she said quietly, turning to her husband. "How much more can she take?" Louis sighed, gripping the wheel. "More than any of us give her credit for." Inside the school, Jane tried to move through the halls unseen, slipping past groups of laughing kids. But it didn't take long for the whispers to start. "Is she wearing an eye patch? Looks like a pirate." Jane kept walking, her head low. In homeroom, Mrs. Roselle, the teacher, called for introductions. "Let's start with you," Mrs. Roselle said, pointing directly at Jane. The room went silent as all eyes turned to her. Jane swallowed hard, her voice trembling. "I'm Jane Harper. I just moved here." "And the patch?" Mrs. Roselle added casually, as though asking about her favorite color. "Are we hiding treasure today?" The room erupted in laughter. Jane's cheeks burned as she looked down at her desk. "No, I need it for my eye," she stammered. "Well," Mrs. Roselle said, clearly pleased with herself, "we'll call you Pirate Jane then." The nickname spread like wildfire. In gym class, it was worse. "Hey, Pirate Jane," one of the boys sneered as he tossed a dodgeball her way, hitting her squarely in the shoulder. Jane winced, but she said nothing. She never said anything. By lunchtime, she was done. She sat in the farthest corner of the cafeteria, her tray untouched as tears pricked her eyes. She thought of Thailand, the friends she left behind, the place where no one cared about her eye patch, where she had felt normal. That evening, Jane sat curled up in her bed, hugging her knees. The house was quiet, except for the faint sound of her parents' voices downstairs. She could hear the worry in their tone, the helplessness. It felt like her burden had become theirs. Then, the doorbell rang. Jane didn't move, too lost in her thoughts. But moments later, her mother's voice called up the stairs. "Jane, sweetie, someone's here to see you." She wiped her face and pushed herself off the bed. Her footsteps were hesitant as she made her way to the front door. When she saw who stood there, her breath caught. Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson filled the doorway, his towering frame unmistakable, his presence larger than life. He smiled, the warmth of it breaking through Jane's disbelief. "Hey kid," he said, his voice soft and steady. "You must be Jane." Jane's eyes widened. You're the Rock." He laughed, kneeling slightly to meet her gaze. "Guilty as charged. You mind if I come in?" Rebecca, standing beside him, gestured nervously. "Please, come in, Mr. Johnson." "Call me Dwayne," he said with a reassuring smile. The living room felt impossibly small, with Dwayne Johnson sitting on the couch, his focus entirely on Jane, who perched in the chair across from him. She stared at him, still trying to process what was happening. "I saw your mom's post," Dwayne began, his tone kind. "I read about what you're going through at school. I wanted to come and tell you something important." Jane fidgeted with the hem of her sweater. "Why would someone like you care?" Dwayne's smile faded into something softer. "Because I know what it feels like to be different. When I was your age, I got made fun of too. I was bigger than everyone else. My family moved around a lot, and I felt like I didn't fit in anywhere. But here's the thing, Jane. You're not different in a bad way. You're strong, stronger than you know." Jane blinked, caught off guard. "I don't feel strong." "Strength isn't just about lifting weights or winning fights," Dwayne said, leaning forward. "Sometimes strength is just getting up every morning and facing the world, even when it feels impossible. Sometimes it's not letting the words of others define who you are." Tears welled up in Jane's eyes, and she quickly looked away, embarrassed. "It's okay," Dwayne said softly. "You're allowed to cry. You're allowed to feel hurt. But I want you to remember something. You're not alone. You've got parents who love you, and you've got people like me who believe in you." Jane wiped her tears with the back of her hand. "But what about school? Everyone laughs at me, even my teacher." Her voice broke. "I can't go back there. I just can't." Dwayne's expression grew serious. "You're right. What happened to you wasn't okay, and it's not something you should have to deal with. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to make sure your voice gets heard. Tomorrow, I'm going to school with you." Jane stared at him, eyes wide. "You're coming with me?" "You bet," he said, grinning. And trust me, no one's going to laugh at you when the rock's got your back. That night, for the first time in months, Jane slept peacefully. The next morning, when Jane walked through the school doors with Dwayne Johnson beside her, the entire hallway fell silent. Students stared, mouths open in shock. Whispers rippled through the crowd like a wave. Is that the Rock? No way. Dwayne's towering presence was impossible to ignore as he walked Jane to her classroom. When they entered, Mrs. Rosell looked up, clearly flustered. Mr. Johnson, Dwayne held up a hand, his expression calm but firm. Mrs. Rosell, I'm here to talk about what happened yesterday. You called Jane a pirate and humiliated her in front of the class. That's not okay. The room was dead silent. Jane sat at her desk, her heart pounding as she watched. I don't know if you thought it was a joke, Dwayne continued, his voice steady. But making a kid feel small isn't funny. It's hurtful. Teachers are supposed to lift students up, not tear them down. Mrs. Rosell shifted uncomfortably. I didn't mean... Intent doesn't erase impact, Dwayne said firmly. These kids look up to you. Your words matter. They have power. Turning to the class, Dwayne addressed the students directly. Look, I know it's easy to laugh when someone's different. But what if it was you? What if it was your little sister or your best friend? Being kind doesn't cost you anything, but it can mean everything to someone else. The students nodded, their faces solemn. Jane sat straighter in her seat, feeling something shift in the air. Jane, Dwayne said, turning to her with a smile. You're not a pirate, you're a fighter. And fighters don't give up. Jane smiled back, tears glistening in her eyes. Thank you, she whispered. The bell rang, and as Dwayne left the school, students swarmed Jane. Not to tease her, but to talk to her, to apologize, to ask if the Rock really ate 12 pancakes for breakfast. For the first time, Jane felt seen, not for her eye patch, but for who she was. When her parents picked her up that afternoon, Jane climbed into the car with a smile so bright it filled the space. Mom, Dad, she said. I had a good day. Rebecca turned, tears in her eyes. We're so proud of you, sweetheart. In the weeks that followed, Jane walked through the halls with her head held high. The whispers were gone, replaced by respect and kindness. And though Dwayne Johnson's visit had made headlines, for Jane, it wasn't just about a celebrity showing up. It was about someone believing in her when she couldn't believe in herself. Sometimes, all it takes is one person to remind you of your own strength. For Jane Harper, that moment changed everything.